All right, as I said, we're going to start looking at old school way of doing this. I'm going to try to just buzz through this quickly because you guys are studying different parts of the Middle Ages, right? You're taking chunks and you are making projects out of that as if you're writing a paper. However, you're making a documentary is what you're making. But this is second period BT dub. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on this. And for those that are gone, this is kind of an interesting, it could be an interesting little trip for you down old school lane. All right, so we look at Europe, what it is today. And this is an older map, so we're probably missing out on something. But you notice all the different little red lines. What does that tell us, Danny?
There's a lot of division there.
There's a lot of countries that were set up, right? But then if we go to old Middle Ages Europe, it's hard to tell, but do you see the divisions? They've got it in colors and everything else. We've got the Kingdom of Hungary, okay? You have the Holy Roman Empire up in here. Poland. And there's some different areas up in there. There's the Black Sea. But you can see that it wasn't set yet, right? So what happened at the end? What was life like at the end of the Roman Empire? Tell me what you think.
Not too good.
Why? What was wrong?
A lot of different things.
Okay, give me one. What after it fell, after Rome is done, what happened?
Well, everyone's scattered.
Everyone's scattered. What kind of military do you have in a country that's fallen? Huh? Zero. You have zero. That's right. Okay? Zero military. Zero protection. Who do they need protection from? Nobody remembers.
The tribes.
Tribes. Good. We have all sorts of barbarian tribes coming in and invading the Roman Empire. There's no longer an empire. They're crossing those borders. They're trying to set up and take over everything. Rape, pillage, and plunder. So something had to happen, didn't it? To fix all of that. Something had to happen. Do we know what happened? Anybody studying the early part? No, there's no presentations. Why am I doing this? I'm just giving you a quick presentation to show you what had to happen. We got tribes invading from the north, from the east. We have chaos because there's no government anymore. What is your Roman money worth after Roman Empire falls?
Almost nothing.
Well, if you melt it down, it might be worth something to somebody somewhere, but as far as an actual Roman coin, it's not going to have any value for at least a few hundred years when you can sell it on eBay. Right? Then it's like, oh, it's worth a lot now. Okay, here's another example. This is probably a little better picture. Caliphate. Do you see that? The Caliphate of Cordoba. The Caliphate of Cordoba. What's a caliphate? We've heard this term in modern times. Which group is trying to set up a caliphate? Who is it? In the news. Somebody said it. Say it again. Somebody back here. All I heard was a whisper. ISIS. So what group would you say is in this area then? What type of people are in here since they set up a caliphate? What type of religion does ISIS follow?
Islam.
Islam. What kind of group would be in here?
Muslims.
Good. Muslims are all through Spain. Okay? We have the kingdom of the Franks. You guys should know this. Right? Because this is you're kind of studying the guy that brought back and helped this area. Who was that guy? Chuck the Great. Okay? Charlemagne. Which means Charles the Great. His dad helped drive out these guys. Okay? I always get a kick out of the kingdom of Leon. I knew a guy named Leon. Wouldn't think of him as having a kingdom. But anyway, the kingdom of Leon. We've got a lot of divisions up in here. This looks nothing like England today, does it? What would you say this is divided up with? What do you suppose each one of these things is? What kind of people are running it? A tribe, maybe? A group of like-minded people in an area trying to protect themselves from any invaders that may be coming in. Because we know another group's coming in. Starts with a V. Go ahead, Bergstrom. You know this one? Group coming in to Europe. What is it? Starts with V. Football team north of us. Vikings! Yeah! Those guys are looking for food, for crying out loud. All of this stuff is happening in a period that we like to call the Dark Ages. Why do we call it dark? Any idea? That was a smooth transition, wasn't it? You were kind of impressed. I saw it, Danny. Yes?
Like a period like repress like ideas that are other than like religious beliefs.
Good. Who's in charge of the whole area pretty much at this particular time? Which organization do you suppose took over as the main religion? Christianity, but which group? Yeah, it's not the Lutherans. That's not for a few hundred years. Okay? It's the Roman Catholic Church. Okay? And a lot of the stuff that they said was, they removed all thoughts of humanism and focused only on God as the giver and the taker of everything. So we got a couple things going on. It generally refers to life in Europe from the fall of the Roman Empire to the beginning of the Renaissance. Okay? How many years is that? Anybody a math major in here? 700. Okay, thank you. Okay, 700. Jeremiah, I'm going to quick send this off to one of your math teachers and say, look at how fast he did that.
Negative
All right.
700.
Huh?
Negative 700.
Whatever. All right, 700 years. That's what we're looking at. That's a long period of time. What do you suppose is happening with all these tribes invading and everything going on? Any ideas? Let's do a prediction. What do you suppose is happening? Yeah.
Borders are changing often and like people are just constantly kind of at war.
Okay, borders changing often. Okay, how would we set up a border in a time of chaos? Wars are going on often. How do we set up these borders? Should help a little. Okay, this is more of a cultural term, the Dark Ages is, than political. It refers to the lack of interest in the arts and general lack of any worldly pursuits. So basically everything that the Romans and the Greeks were about, and even the Persians, all the way across all of that area, is gone. Because the focus isn't on humanities. The focus is on Christianity, right? You have people that are poor. You have people that are rich. What do we call those? What's our social studies term for those that are rich and poor? Wow, this little break we had working on a project has really turned your brains to stone. Come on, somebody answer. Do you suppose it has something to do with the idea of haves and have-nots? We're in a time of total chaos, yet we still have those who have and have not. Now, once again, we come back to the borders question. Who do you suppose is setting up these borders? The haves or the have-nots? The haves. Thank you. Okay? So they have. What do they have? Yeah.
So like the haves just want as much land and control because the more land they have, the more people they have within their land, and the more resources they gain, which gives them a greater overall wealth.
Good. That's exactly right. We're looking at the fact that we have people that have money, right? And they have behind them the money to pay for military to help them build up and protect the borders that they set up, and they acquire land, right? They become the chief lord over an area. Ooh, lord or king of an area. That gives us, the area would be called then, since there's a king, we would call it a kingdom, right? Kingdoms start getting built all around Europe. The Roman Empire isn't there to help them anymore. They start gathering themselves together into groups, right? And the king, of course, is going to have loyal subjects, And then he's going to have, they're kind of there. Those people there will have people under them that are loyal, bigger numbers. Then below them, you have people that have got nothing, and they just need help of the government to survive, right? Well, this kind of works out to a new system, doesn't it? And we call that system feudalism. Good, huh? These transitions are awesome, right, Jackson? All right. Anyway, what is it? Somebody tell me what this is. See if you can figure this out. Any idea? I know you guys have had a little bit of this last year, not much, as far as the pyramid of power. What's the pyramid of power? Natalie? Any idea? Okay. Do you think this is kind of important to see how our government went from one chaotic area to organized all the way to the United States? Because, see, the United States wanted to end feudalism. Okay? So this is kind of important, don't you think? Kind of leads to American government, really, and American history. So we better take a look at this. The political, social, military, and economic structure of medieval Europe. This is something you might want to write down. Okay? So I'm going to pause this for a second. Okay, now that you got some notes, this is kind of important stuff. Like I said, feudalism is what brings us where we are today. This is the humble beginnings of all the craziness, right? It is. It's the humble beginnings of all of the craziness that we have today. We wanted to end feudalism because it's not a very fair system. But was it necessary when there's chaos and there's invaders and the money is worthless? And is it necessary? Absolutely. Okay? There's a lot of things that we do that are necessary at the time, but they might not be necessary after a while, right? So, let's take a look at the basic structure of feudalism so we get an idea. Okay, we're just looking at the feudalism system and that's it. We're not going to go a whole bunch further into who was in charge of what. That's your job. My job is to give you the basic structure where these people that you're studying came from or how they interacted with all of these kingdoms throughout Europe. Right? Okay. So, it has 7 levels. And here it comes. It creates a pyramid. That is pretty cool. All right? So you got 7 levels at the first level, which would be right up here on top. The king. Now, here's something for you that's not on this presentation. Kings at that time thought that, honestly, since Christianity was big, the Catholic Church is in charge, they thought that God had appointed them to be the ruler over whatever territory or kingdom they were in charge of. Right? So, honestly, you could make this pyramid upside down, put it right here at the point and say, God. These guys, in fact, a lot of the kings thought that they were gods on earth themselves because they were able to take control and charge of everywhere, or their family was able to take control and set up these borders, protect their people, and set up this system. Right? So these guys, do you think they were cocky, thinking that they were gods themselves? Some were really benevolent, trying to act like God and help the people below them. Some were tyrants. What's a tyrant? Does anybody know?
It's like they just kind of rule without like caring about anybody else.
A tyrant is someone who has no concern about the people under him, just himself. And he's going to run the country in such a way, whether it destroys all of his people or not. And he's going to rule with an incredibly harsh hand. Right? Get out of line, we'll kill you. All right? That type of stuff. All right, next in line. You have the King's Vassal. And it's called a lord. Another word that you could put in next to lord would be baron. Okay, you should draw this triangle. It's something you're going to need. Because guess what? I do this again when you're a senior. I would love it if you could fill it in for me, Jeremiah. I wish I could. It'd be awesome. All right. So below that you have a lord, and he's called a vassal because he gives loyalty to this guy. The word they used was fealty, F-E-A-L-T-Y, fealty, which meant they were willing to be under him. See, if you've got a whole bunch of kings in one area, what are they going to do all the time? They all think they're appointed by God. What do you think they're going to do in one closed-in area?
War.
They're going to fight. But if you have one that's powerful enough to control this whole area, in order to stop the fighting, he would trade with these other kings or lords that were under him. They would give him a huge chunk of the land and say, this is yours to control. I'm over all of the chunks of land, but this is your chunk of land to be in charge of. You are the lord of that land. And in exchange for that land, all you have to do is be loyal to me, pay taxes to me when I need them, supply troops, right? Those are all important things that they needed. Do you understand how this is working? It was a way that the king used to control the people under him so he could make a steady, stable kingdom. If we go all the way back in Persia times, what was that group of governors? Remember what that was? If we go all the way back to Persian times, there was Darius steps up and he sets up this big satrapies, right? Do you think these guys knew some of that from history, or do you think they just made it up right off the top of their head? History's kind of important. I think they learned it from history. All right, next below that you have the Barons Vassal. This guy gets a chunk of land from this guy who got a chunk of land from this guy. By the way, the name of that land is fief. F-I-E-F. A fief of land. Not Barney Fief. Okay, from Andy Griffith. I know, that's what you were thinking, Jackson. I saw it. However, it's kind of interesting stuff. With that fief of land, they would hand it down to their knights, or lesser lords is another word you could say. Now, is there probably more steps in there? Probably. Depends on how big the land is that this guy got. He may have to divide it and set up a whole other thing that says lesser lords. That those guys would break it down until finally it comes down to the manor house. How many have heard that term before on TV if you've ever watched a documentary or anything like that? A manor house. Have you heard that before? Okay. The lord of the manor. It's the very smallest chunk of land that each one of these lords are in control of. They would give the manor, or the house, the castle, to a knight who would work on training and becoming great. Plus, he would run the farmland that's around the castle, right? But they all still owe loyalty to the lord that's above them. They would still owe loyalty to the lord above them. And they would still owe loyalty to the lord above them until finally it ends up full loyalty to the king above. You see how that works? Seems like a pretty organized system, doesn't it? Just keep breaking it down into smaller and smaller chunks that's controllable and able to use. On those manor houses, those castles, the land was part of his deal. He got the castle, and he got all the farmland around it, okay? And he got workers. We call those people, well, you got freemen that travel back and forth. They're tradesmen. But the last part is serfs. Serfs, peasants, farmers. They were actually considered part of the land. They got to keep a couple of things to eat and things like that, but basically they worked for room and board. A house, a place they could grind their wheat into flour or barley or whatever it was, right? But it's kind of the same as something else.
Slavery.
Slavery, thank you. Thank you, Danny. All right, slaves are the last part. Now, these are not your normal slaves in the early time period. What do you suppose these people were? These people were working off a debt a lot of times. Or they were political prisoners. which means that they were captured in a battle and they're not willing to conform to the feudalist society that was created. And so they become slaves. They're stuck to the land. But basically, these serfs could never leave the farm. They could never marry who they wanted, or I shouldn't say never. Most of the time, they were not allowed to get married without the manor lord's permission. The lord of the manor, the lord of the castle, right? They would have to wait and get permission from him to marry somebody else in the village. Think that's pretty good control? I don't know. They could never leave, though, without the permission of the Lord. Now, there is a group called Peasants. How many have heard that term before? Oh, yeah, 4 of you. Come on, guys. It's the second period. You need to wake up. Okay? So, these peasants actually could leave and travel to another farm. But their station in life was always going to be a tenant farmer. Somebody who basically had to rent the land from the lord of a manor in order to farm the land, or they would get to stay as a serf, but they could leave, come and go, not as they pleased. Some of them could actually become serfs and become part of the land. Depends on if they paid their debts or not. Does this seem like a pretty tough society? Or do you think that it calmed everything down? You tell me, what do you think? Do you think it calmed down the chaos? Or do you think it was just too brutal? What do you think, Chris? Too brutal? Not being able to leave the farm? You realize if you were a serf, here's the downside. There is one more on here. It's clergy, and they are completely separate, independent of the other units with the exception of the king. He was an advisor to the king. He was God's voice to the God on earth himself. All right, anyway, if you were a serf, your children, your children's children, your children's children's children, you go on and on and on, will always be serfs. What's the opportunity of moving up in a society like that? What do you think, Donald? If you're a serf, all of your kids from the future on until the end of time would be serfs. You're stuck there forever. Your whole family's stuck there forever. Okay? Now, some of the benefits that these guys would get, they got a church. They had a mill. Of course, they'd have to pay to have their grain ground. Right? They would have a baker, candlestick maker. All that stuff is in there. Basically, what do you suppose it turns out to be later on? This little manor house. As it grows in size, it starts expanding, and you're walking from one of these to the other. What do you suppose it develops into? It goes from a village to a... What would come next after village, after it grows? What comes after village in the growth of a society? Town. Thank you. And then the town grows into city. Do you see how that works? You see what I mean? Those are basically villages that start out later on become towns. Some of them don't grow into cities. They just stay as towns. But this is your earliest setup for that in Europe. Now, oops, went back, didn't it? All right. If you were the king, who is the next king? Anybody know?
Your son. Your oldest son.
Your oldest son. Okay? Can anyone else become king? Are we guaranteed a good king in the minds of someone who follows? And this theory is called divine right. Divine right. Okay? Divine right says, I have holy Christian blood, I am a God on earth, and my children also will be the same. Guaranteed a good leader from the son of this king? No, he could be worthless, right? Or he could be brutal, or he could be stupid. Who knows, right? Same with these guys. Their chance of being a lord, you could have somebody who runs his area perfectly, is kind to his people, keeps them interested in staying part of his group. But then he could turn around and you could have a son. He could have a son that turns out to be worthless. You get a position in the military because of who you are, not how good you are at military stuff. That's why sometimes you would get really good generals, because they were educated. Sometimes you'd have idiots.